So first off, where does the term gerrymandering come from?
It comes from 1812. There was a governor of Massachusetts by the name of Elbridge Gerry. He was a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, vice president to James Madison, but he had the unfortunate luck of being a governor at a time when the redistricting was happening, and the legislature had drawn a district that a political cartoonist in Boston thought looked like a salamander, and so they said, well, that's not a salamander, that's a gerrymander. And so this, unfortunately, this very storied man with a very long history in terms of helping the founding of our nation, he signed this plan into law, and this is what we remember him for today.
Right. So when making this film, did you find that the public was aware of the impact that gerrymandering had, or of what it was at all?
I think it's fair to say that most people will never know whether they've been gerrymandered out of a district or not. But they do know that our country's infrastructure is crumbling, our economy is cratered, and government is broken. And it turns out the arcane rules of redistricting impact all this by determining who's elected and who gets represented.
Yeah, most people that we talk to just on the streets, if you went up to somebody and asked them, do you know what gerrymandering is? Most people had no idea.
Right. One of the most astounding parts of the movie, actually, I found, was when the Texas Democrats were fleeing from the state in 2003 to avoid that crucial vote about state redistricting. How does that event play into the film?
Well, I think, we sort of structured the film around all these individual kind of very regional stories because we wanted to get some of the flavor of America into this, because the way we do redistricting here is very distinctly American. Most other countries have changed their systems, and so we're a bit of a relic in that way, and it's based on some traditions that we have. And so the Texas story is great because it's kind of like a heist film. People fleeing in the night, all this other activity happening in the state legislature,
bounty hunters,
that kind of stuff. It's not what you think of when you think of American politics so much. Some people do think about it in terms of Texas politics, but it was just this wild story, and that was actually the impetus for the film at the beginning. And there's a lot more to it that we didn't show, but it's a great anecdote to the lengths that which people and politicians will go to maintain power.
And I think it produces one of the funniest lines in the film, where there's an NYU professor who's interviewed, and he's citing a student paper, and he says he reads the first couple of lines of the paper, which is that historically there have been many reasons why middle-aged men have snuck into hotel rooms in the middle of the night. Up until this point, redistricting hasn't been one of them.
Right. That was a funny part, actually. So also the film, it follows the story of Prop 11, which was ultimately passed. Now, how did that story provide kind of like a narrative almost to this one?
Well, we're dealing with a really complicated subject here, and we're dealing with a really complicated subject in a lot of different kinds of ways over the course of the film. The movie needed a spine, and I think if you're gonna ask people to accept something that's very difficult and material is presented to them in a way that's not the way they're used to accepting it, you need to give them something a little bit back. And so we thought, well, people understand campaign movies. People have seen The West Wing, they've seen The War Room, things like that. They know if you're in a campaign movie, you know that there is a goal, that there are heroes, there are villains, there are certain things that you kind of do and show along the way of that campaign. And so we thought, well, let's capture that energy. Thankfully, it's also about redistricting, which certainly helps. And so let's capture that energy and break it up so that way the film has a bit of a structure to it. Once you have that in place and you know that at the end of the movie you're going to find out what happens to Proposition 11, you can accept going to Animos, Iowa, learning about prison-based gerrymandering. You can accept going to Florida and meeting Senator Dave Arenberg. You can accept going to my district in Brooklyn and meeting Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries, because you know the payoff of all of this is going to be what happens to the Proposition 11 campaign, which we set up at the very beginning of the movie.
And it was historically very important, Proposition 11, because California has tried for 3 decades to implement various forms of redistricting reform. And this was the first time that any measure passed. And so it was a half measure. It only dealt with state level, state assembly and state senate races. But it was nonetheless a big victory for the proponents of reform. This election cycle, we have, of course, a proposition on the ballot to extend that to congressional districts, but we've also got another proposition to roll back Proposition 11. So proponents of reform have to both extend the reforms that they did in 2008 and also defend against the rollback of the 2008 reform.
Right. So another very humorous but true part of the film is the part that explains how some the districts, they noticeably look like distorted pictures. Some were called the headphone district. Some were called one was called the bad hair day. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think it's one of the best parts about why this subject lends itself so well to a film. It's so visual. And people say, well, redistricting is complicated and you can't digest it in 30, 60-second commercial slots. But there is one part of it that's very easy and very intuitive, which was when you see a district that looks nothing like a community, you intuitively understand that that district was created for a purpose other than to represent the community. And so there was another agenda at stake. And that, I think, is the best really way to educate people about what happens every 10 years in America.
The range of the stories in the film, very expansive. It covers small town, city council members who are allegedly being unfairly elected into office, and then it covers also the rise in political power of now President Barack Obama. So how did all those little stories, and even the big ones, kind of define the message that you were trying to come?
Well, I think it was really important for us to really kind of show the whole sweep and scope of American politics. We could have made a movie that was just about congressional districts, but I think some of the really interesting action around redistricting happens at the local level. And we also wanted people to feel that this was something that was tangible, that touches them. A congressional district is really big. You feel really small in the size of a congressional district, but in terms of state legislative seats, you might know your state assemblyman. You might see him or her at the grocery store, and if you knew that your state assemblyman was going to be drawn out of a district, or had been drawn out of a district, that might galvanize you and give you the energy to go out and learn a little bit more, about your community, learn to be more engaged and active in politics.
I think there's any number of expansive stories around in the film, but I think the underlying theme that the film is trying to promote is that the villain isn't Barack Obama, or for that matter any other politician there. These politicians are working within the system. They're not doing anything illegal. The system allows politicians in a perfectly legal way to fix elections for sometimes decades at a time. And it's the system that is the villain. That's the enemy, and that's what we want to galvanize a grand grassroots movement around.
Right. And so lastly, the decision of the film to be presented to the audience without a narrator is one that's usually commonly used. What was it about this movie that you didn't want a narrator, or something that wanted to remove yourself from?
It's a personal thing for me, and we all went back and forth about this. But personally, as a filmmaker, I think narration is often used because you're lazy, and you haven't found a better way to move people through your movie. And there were versions of this film that might have benefited from some narration, but once we settled on figuring out how to use the animation as a kind of omniscience, so basically every time you move to someplace else, the animation takes you there. You don't need somebody to tell you that you're going to Amos, Iowa, because you see the map, you see it drawn in, and then boom, you're thrust into another sequence. I don't think, we could have put words there, but I think it would actually slowed the film down and made the pace work less.
Right. Well, great. That's pretty much it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.